I was watching a crowd of people record on their phones, while a grown man screamed at a terrified 19-year-old about stolen money. And I knew that in about 30 seconds, either I was going to walk away and pretend I didn't see it, or I was going to do something that would change both our lives forever. My name is Sam Harris, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of injustice this world had to offer. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 30 years running my own construction business, and the last 5 years working security at Grandview Shopping Center had taught me that people can be cruel, but they can also surprise you when it matters most. What I didn't expect was that defending one scared kid would lead to the most important moment of my entire life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when everything went sideways. I was doing my usual rounds through the shopping center, checking in with the store managers, making sure everything was running smooth. The place wasn't much to look at. One of those aging strip malls that had seen better days, with a grocery store as the anchor tenant, and a handful of smaller shops hanging on by their fingernails. But it was honest work, and at my age, honest work that let me help people was all I really wanted. I was walking past Tech World Electronics when I heard the shouting. Now, I've been around enough angry people to know the difference between someone having a bad day and someone who's completely lost control. This was the second kind, and it was coming from inside the store. Through the big plate glass windows, I could see a crowd gathering around the checkout counter, and in the middle of it all was Tim Morrison, one of the youngest employees in the whole shopping center. Tim was a good kid, quiet, polite, always said, "Yes, sir," when I'd check in on the store during my rounds. He was trying to work his way through community college, picking up as many hours as he could get to help his single mom pay the bills. The kind of kid who still opened doors for elderly customers and stayed late when they needed him. But right now, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, standing behind the register with his hands shaking and his face white as a sheet. The man doing the shouting was Derek Paulson, the assistant manager who'd been hired about 6 months earlier. Derek was everything I couldn't stand about the younger generation of management. All ambition and no wisdom, the kind of guy who thought being loud made him right and being mean made him strong. He was maybe 30 years old, wore expensive suits that didn't quite fit his personality, and had this way of talking down to everyone who worked under him, like they were personally disappointing him just by existing. "You think I'm stupid, Tim?" Derek was yelling, his voice carrying across the store and out into the mall corridor. "You think I don't know what happened here? $63 is missing from your register, and you're the only one who's been working it today." I could see customers backing away from the confrontation, some of them pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Tim was trying to speak, but Derek kept cutting him off, waving his arms around like he was conducting some kind of twisted orchestra. "I didn't take anything, Mr. Paulson," Tim was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "I followed all the procedures. I counted everything twice before my break. I don't understand how—" "Don't lie to me!" Derek slammed his hand down on the counter so hard that the cash register jumped. "I've been watching you, kid. Coming in here with your ratty clothes and your sob story about college. You think because people feel sorry for you, you can just help yourself to whatever you want." That's when I decided I'd heard enough. See, there's something about watching a grown man humiliate a kid in public that just doesn't sit right with me. Maybe it goes back to my time in the service, where we looked after the young soldiers who were scared and far from home. Maybe it's because I remembered being 19 myself, working whatever job I could find, and trying to make something of myself while older men decided whether I was worth their respect. I walked into Tech World, moving slow and deliberate the way I'd learned to do when I needed to de-escalate a situation without making it worse. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm and friendly. "Is there a problem here I might be able to help with?" Derek spun around to face me, and I could see that he was already too worked up to think straight. His face was flushed red. His hair was sticking up where he'd been running his hands through it, and he had that wild look in his eyes that meant he was more interested in being right than being smart. "This doesn't concern you, Sam," he said, trying to wave me off. "This is store business, internal matters." "Well, Derek, when it's loud enough for customers to hear 3 stores down, it kind of becomes everyone's business," I replied, glancing around at the people who were still watching from the doorway. "Maybe we could handle this a little more quietly." "He stole money," Derek said, pointing at Tim like he was presenting evidence in court. $63 right out of the register. And now he's standing there, lying to my face about it. I looked at Tim, who was gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles were white. The kid looked terrified, but he didn't look guilty. I'd seen enough guilty people in my time to know the difference. Guilty people get defensive and angry. Scared, innocent people just get smaller and smaller until they disappear. "Tim," I said, "why don't you tell me what happened?" "From the beginning. I opened the register this morning with $200 like always," Tim said, his voice still shaky but getting a little stronger. "I counted it twice, just like the manual says. I've been working the counter all day, following every procedure. When Mr. Paulson counted the till for the midday check, it came up $63 short." "See?" Derek jumped in. "He admits it. The money's gone, and he's the only one who—" "Derek," I said, and something in my tone made him stop talking. "Let the boy finish." Tim glanced between me and Derek, then continued. "I don't know where the money went. I've been going over every transaction in my head, checking the receipts, trying to figure out if I made a mistake with change, or if someone paid with a bad bill, or I just don't know. Now, I'm not a detective, but I've been around long enough to know that people who steal money don't usually volunteer to check the receipts and figure out where it went. They just deny everything and hope you can't prove it." Tim was doing the opposite. He was trying to solve the problem. "Has anything like this happened before?" I asked Derek. "Money coming up short in the tills?" Derek's face got even redder. "That's not the point. The point is that this kid is responsible for his register, and if money goes missing on his watch, he's accountable for it." "I understand accountability," I said. "But I also understand that sometimes things happen that aren't anyone's fault. Equipment malfunctions, counting errors, honest mistakes." "There was no mistake," Derek snapped. "I counted that till myself, twice. $63 missing, and Timmy here is the only one who had access to it." That's when he made his big mistake. Derek stepped closer to Tim, getting right in the kid's face, and said, "You know what? I'm calling the police. Let them sort this out. Maybe a night in jail will help you remember where you put that money." The color drained completely out of Tim's face. "Please, Mr. Paulson, I didn't steal anything. I need this job. My mom, she's been sick, and I'm the only one working right now. Please don't call the police." "Should have thought about that before you decided to become a thief," Derek said, pulling out his phone. That's when I stepped between them. "Derek," I said, "you need to slow down here. You're about to accuse a kid of a crime based on nothing but a discrepancy in a cash register. That's a serious thing. It's $63, Sam. That's not exactly petty cash." No, it's not. But it's also not enough money to destroy a kid's future over without being absolutely certain of what happened. Derek looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Are you saying I don't know how to do my job? I'm saying maybe we should take a step back and think about this logically. Tim's been working here for what, 8 months? Has he ever had money come up short before? That's not. Has he? I pressed. Derek hesitated. No, but. Has he ever been late for work? Ever called in sick when you didn't believe him? Ever given you any reason to think he wasn't trustworthy? That doesn't matter. The money is gone. It matters a lot, Derek, because if you call the police on this kid based on nothing but a missing $63, and it turns out there's an innocent explanation, you're going to ruin his life for no good reason. By now, there were at least a dozen people watching our conversation, and I could hear murmurs from the crowd. That manager's out of line, someone whispered. An elderly woman called out, "Leave the boy alone!" A middle-aged man in a construction vest shook his head and said loudly, $63. You'd destroy a kid's future over $63? Derek noticed the crowd turning against him, and it was making him even angrier. You know what, Sam? This is exactly the problem with your generation. Everything's got to be handled with kid gloves. Everyone gets a participation trophy. Well, in the real world, actions have consequences. You're right, I said. Actions do have consequences. And right now, your actions are about to have consequences for a 19-year-old kid who's trying to work his way through school and help his sick mother. He stole money. You don't know that. You think that. There's a difference. Derek was getting frustrated that he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted from me. He'd expected me to either back down or support his authority as the assistant manager. Instead, I was questioning his judgment in front of a crowd of people, and that was the one thing his ego couldn't handle. You know what? He said, raising his voice even louder. I don't need to justify my decisions to a security guard. You're not even a real employee here. You're just some old guy the shopping center hired to walk around and make people feel safe. The crowd went quiet. Even Tim looked up from his hands to see how I was going to react to that little insult. But I'd been called worse things by better people, so Derek's words didn't really bother me. You're absolutely right, I said. I am just some old guy who walks around and tries to help people feel safe. And right now, Tim doesn't feel very safe, does he? That's his problem. No, Derek, that's your problem. Because whether you realize it or not, everyone in this store, everyone in this whole shopping center, is watching how you handle this situation. And they're making judgments about whether this is the kind of place they want to shop, whether this is the kind of place they want to work, whether this is the kind of place they want to support with their money. I gestured towards the crowd of customers who were still watching. Look around. How many of these people do you think are going to come back here after watching you destroy a 19-year-old kid over $63? Derek looked around and seemed to realize for the first time that he had an audience. But instead of calming down, he doubled down. I don't care who's watching. I've got a business to run, and I'm not going to let some punk kid steal from me. Then let's figure out what really happened, I said. Check the security cameras. Look at the receipts. Go through the transactions one by one. If Tim stole that money, it'll show up somewhere. I don't have time for that. You've got time to call the police and destroy this kid's life, but you don't have time to actually investigate what happened? That seemed to hit a nerve. Derek's face got so red I thought he might pass out. You know what, Sam? I'm tired of you interfering with how I run my store, If you don't like the way I handle things, you can take it up with my manager. But right now, I want you to leave. Derek, leave. Now, or I'll call security." The irony of threatening to call security on the security guard wasn't lost on anyone in the crowd. A few people actually chuckled, which made Derek even madder. "Fine," I said. "I'll go. But before I do, I want to say something to Tim." I turned to the kid, who was still standing behind the register, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Tim, I want you to remember something. There are two kinds of people in this world. People who try to build others up, and people who try to tear others down. Don't let anyone convince you that you deserve to be treated badly just because they have authority over you. And don't let anyone make you believe that making an honest living is something to be ashamed of." Tim nodded, and I could see tears starting to form in his eyes. "And Derek," I said, turning back to the assistant manager, "I hope that $63 is worth whatever this is going to cost you." With that, I walked out of Tech World Electronics, past the crowd of customers who were still watching, and back into the main corridor of the shopping center. I could hear Derek behind me, yelling at people to mind their own business and get back to shopping. But I didn't look back. I finished my rounds that afternoon trying to put the whole incident out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the image of Tim's face when Derek was threatening to call the police. The kid had looked so scared, so helpless, and it reminded me of another young man who'd been scared and helpless, half a world away and more than a decade ago. His name was Michael Chen, and he was 19 years old when I first met him. Fresh out of basic training, deployed to Afghanistan for his first tour, and absolutely terrified of everything. He'd been assigned to my unit. I was a staff sergeant then, responsible for a squad of 12 soldiers. And it was obvious from day one that the kid was in over his head. Michael was from a small town in Iowa, had never been more than 50 miles from home before joining the Army, and suddenly found himself in a desert where people were trying to kill him on a daily basis. He was smart enough and brave enough, but he was also 19 and scared. And some of the older soldiers in the unit had decided that made him a liability. They weren't cruel about it. Not exactly. But they didn't include him in conversations, didn't invite him to join them during downtime, and made little comments about how maybe he should have stayed home with his mother instead of trying to be a soldier. It was the kind of casual cruelty that people convince themselves isn't really cruelty at all. I'd seen it before, and I knew how dangerous it could be. A soldier who doesn't feel like he belongs with his unit is a soldier who's going to make mistakes. And mistakes in a combat zone get people killed. So I made it my business to look after Michael, to make sure he knew that at least one person in the unit cared whether he made it home alive. It paid off about 6 months into our deployment, when our convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. The explosion flipped our lead vehicle and left 3 soldiers trapped inside with the engine on fire. Michael was in the vehicle behind me, and when I ordered everyone to dismount and help with the rescue, he was the first one out of his seat and running toward the burning truck. He didn't hesitate, didn't think about his own safety, didn't worry about whether he was qualified to help. He just saw people who needed help and ran toward them instead of away from them. Together, we pulled all 3 soldiers out of that truck before it exploded completely. 2 of them lived because a scared 19-year-old kid from Iowa decided to be brave when it mattered. That was the moment I learned something important about people, that sometimes the ones who seem the weakest are the ones who find the most strength when you really need them. And sometimes all it takes is one person believing in them to help them find that strength. Standing in that shopping center corridor, Thinking about Tim Morrison and Michael Chen, I realized that I was probably never going to see that kid again. Derek would almost certainly fire him, and even if he didn't, Tim would probably quit, rather than face the humiliation of working for someone who'd accused him of stealing. It made me angry all over again, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. Or so I thought. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when my daughter called me from California. Jennifer had been living out there for about 10 years, working as a marketing consultant for tech companies, and we talked every few weeks to catch up on each other's lives. "Dad," she said, "I just saw the most incredible video on Facebook. There's this old security guard who stood up to some asshole manager who was trying to get a kid arrested for something he probably didn't even do. The way he handled it was just, it reminded me of you." "What do you mean it reminded you of me?" "Just the way he stayed calm and tried to talk sense into everyone. The way he cared more about doing the right thing than about staying out of trouble." I shared it with all my friends. My stomach dropped. "Jennifer, what exactly was in this video?" "Some kid working at an electronics store, and his manager was screaming at him about missing money, threatening to call the police. And then this security guard stepped in and basically told the manager he was being an idiot. The whole thing was recorded on someone's phone." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. "Was the security guard, was he an older guy? Gray hair, maybe wearing a uniform?" "Yeah, why?" "Dad, you sound weird. Do you know something about this? I think I might be the security guard in that video." "What? Are you serious?" I explained what had happened the day before at Tech World Electronics, and Jennifer went quiet for a long time. "Dad," she finally said, "this video has been shared like 50,000 times since yesterday. People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero, Jen. I just couldn't stand there and watch that kid get railroaded." "That's exactly what makes you a hero. Most people would have just walked away." After I hung up with Jennifer, I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out how I felt about being the subject of a viral video. On one hand, I'd never wanted to be famous for anything, and the idea of thousands of strangers watching me argue with Derek Paulson made me uncomfortable. On the other hand, if it meant people were talking about how Tim had been treated, maybe some good would come out of it. I got my answer when I arrived at work that afternoon and found my supervisor, Maria Santos, waiting for me in the security office. Maria was a good boss, fair, reasonable, and always willing to listen to both sides of a story before making decisions. She'd been running security for the shopping center for about 8 years, and in all that time, I'd never seen her look as serious as she did that day. "Sam," she said, "we need to talk." I figured as much. "Is this about yesterday?" "It's about the video of yesterday that's been viewed 500,000 times since this morning." I sat down across from her desk and waited for whatever was coming next. "I've been getting calls all morning," Maria continued, "from the shopping center management, from Tech World Corporate, from reporters, from people who want to know if we're going to fire you or give you a medal." "What do you want to know?" "I want to know what really happened. Not the version that's going around on social media, but the actual truth." So I told her. Everything, from the moment I heard Derek shouting to the moment I walked out of the store. I didn't try to make myself look better or make Derek look worse. I just told her exactly what had happened and why I'd made the decisions I made. When I finished, Maria was quiet for a long time, just looking at me across her desk. "Sam," she said finally, "in all the time you've worked here, have you ever had a complaint filed against you?" No. Have you ever been late for work or called in sick when you weren't really sick, or done anything that made me question your judgment? Not that I know of. Do you think you handled yesterday's situation appropriately? I thought about that for a moment. I think I handled it the only way I could live with. If that cost me my job, then so be it. Maria smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. What do you mean? I mean that Tech World's district manager called me this morning to apologize for Derek Paulson's behavior. Apparently, they've been getting so many angry calls and emails about that video that their customer service department is completely overwhelmed. So what does that mean for me? It means you're not fired. In fact, they've asked me to thank you for preventing what could have been a much worse situation. If Derek had actually called the police on that kid, she didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew that having a 19-year-old arrested for theft, based on nothing but a missing $63, would have been a public relations nightmare that lasted for months. What about Derek? Derek Paulson is no longer employed by Tech World Electronics. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness at that news. I was glad that Derek wouldn't be able to treat other employees the way he'd treated Tim, but I also knew that losing a job is never easy, even when you bring it on yourself. And Tim, still employed. In fact, they found the missing money. Where was it? Stuck in the cash register drawer. Apparently, one of the bills had gotten caught behind the cash tray and wasn't visible during the count. When they pulled the register apart to clean it this morning, there it was. I shook my head. All of that drama, all of that humiliation, all of Derek's righteous anger, and it had been a mechanical problem the whole time. Has anyone told Tim? I believe they're telling him right now. I was happy for Tim, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole situation could have been avoided if Derek had just been willing to consider that there might be an innocent explanation for the missing money. Instead, he'd been so determined to be right that he'd nearly destroyed a kid's life over a cash register malfunction. The rest of that week passed quietly. The video continued to spread on social media, and I got a few interview requests from local news stations, but I turned them all down. I'd never been comfortable being the center of attention, and I figured the whole thing would blow over eventually if I just went about my business and did my job. I was wrong about that. On Friday afternoon, I was doing my usual rounds when I heard sirens outside the shopping center. At first, I didn't think much of it. We got police cars and ambulances through the area pretty regularly. But then, I started smelling smoke. I followed the smell toward the back of the shopping center, where the main electrical room was located. The door was propped open, and I could see smoke coming out of it. Not thick, black smoke like you'd get from a building fire, but the thin, acrid smoke that comes from electrical equipment burning. Inside the electrical room, I found chaos. There were sparks flying from one of the main breaker panels, and the smell of burning insulation was getting stronger by the minute. 2 maintenance workers were standing in the doorway, looking completely overwhelmed. "What happened?" I asked. "Power surge, we think," one of them said. "Something overloaded the system, and now half the circuits are shorting out. We've called the fire department, but they're dealing with a car accident on the other side of town." "Have you shut off the main power?" "We can't get to it. The whole panel is sparking." I looked at the situation and realized we had a serious problem. The shopping center was still full of customers and employees, and if this electrical fire spread to the rest of the building, people could be trapped inside. The emergency lighting was already flickering. which meant the backup power system was being affected too. "We need to evacuate the building," I said. "Mall management isn't here," the other maintenance worker said. "And we don't have authority to order an evacuation." "I don't care about authority," I said. "I care about people not getting hurt." I pulled out my radio and called Maria. "We've got an electrical fire in the main power room, and we need to evacuate the shopping center immediately." "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that I'm not waiting for permission." "Do it." I started with the stores closest to the electrical room and worked my way toward the main entrance. Most of the store managers were cooperative once I explained the situation, but a few of them wanted to argue about closing early and losing sales. "Look," I told one particularly stubborn manager, "you can close now and lose a few hours of sales, or you can wait for the fire department to order everyone out and lose a few days of sales while they investigate. Your choice." When I got to Tech World Electronics, I found Tim working behind the counter, helping a customer with a cell phone case. The store was busy, maybe a dozen people browsing the aisles, and several more waiting in line to check out. "Tim," I said, "I need you to close the store right now. We're evacuating the building." "Mr. Harris?" Tim looked surprised to see me. We hadn't spoken since the incident with Derek earlier that week. "Is everything okay?" "Electrical fire in the main power room. Nothing too dangerous yet, but we need everyone out just in case." Tim didn't argue or ask for permission from his manager. He immediately turned to the customers in the store and announced that they needed to leave due to a maintenance emergency. Most people were understanding, but a few customers complained about having to come back later to make their purchases. One customer, a middle-aged woman with an expensive handbag and an attitude to match, was particularly upset. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I've been waiting in line for 10 minutes, and now you're telling me I have to leave?" "Ma'am," Tim said politely, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I don't want to hear excuses. I want to buy this phone case and get out of here." "Ma'am," I said, stepping up to the counter, "there's an electrical fire in the building. For your safety, we need everyone to exit immediately." "An electrical fire? Where?" "In the main power room." She looked around the store, which still had full power and didn't look dangerous at all. "I don't see any fire. I don't smell any smoke. This sounds like some kind of scam to get people to leave so you can close early." Tim tried again. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we're just following safety procedures." "Safety procedures? You're a kid working in an electronics store. What do you know about safety procedures?" That's when the lights went out. Not all at once, but in sections, as different circuits failed, and the electrical fire spread to more of the building's power grid. The store was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the emergency lighting that was still working. The woman who'd been complaining about leaving immediately changed her tune. "Oh my God, is the building on fire?" "No, ma'am," I said calmly, "but we do need to leave now." I helped Tim guide the remaining customers toward the exit, making sure everyone got out safely. As we were leaving the store, Tim grabbed my arm. "Mr. Harris, thank you for what you did last week. With Mr. Paulson, I mean. I never got a chance to tell you how much it meant to me." "You don't need to thank me, Tim. I just did what anyone should have done." Not everyone would have stood up to him like that. We were walking toward the main entrance when the emergency lighting started flickering more violently. I could see that people were starting to panic, not full-scale hysteria, but the kind of nervous energy that can turn dangerous if people don't know what to do. "Tim," I said, "I need you to help me keep people calm while we get them out of here." "What should I do?" Just talk to them. Let them know that everything's under control, that this is just a precaution, that there's no immediate danger. Tim nodded and started moving through the crowd of evacuees, talking to people in that calm, reassuring voice that had made him good at customer service. He was particularly good with the elderly customers, helping them navigate around obstacles in the dim lighting and making sure they didn't feel rushed or panicked. We'd gotten most people out of the building when I realized we had a problem. The new assistant manager at Tech World, Derek's replacement, was supposed to have left with the rest of his staff, but I didn't see him in the crowd outside. "Tim," I said, "where's your new manager?" "Mr. Peterson? He was in the back office doing inventory when you told us to evacuate. I thought he was right behind us." The back office of Tech World was on the far side of the store from the main entrance, and with the power out, it would be completely dark back there. If Peterson was still in there, he might not even realize that the building was being evacuated. "Stay here and help people," I told Tim. "I'm going back to check on him." "Mr. Harris, is that safe?" I looked back at the shopping center, which was now mostly dark except for a few emergency lights. Through the windows, I could see the glow of sparks from the electrical room, which meant the fire was getting worse instead of better. "Probably not," I said. "But we can't leave him in there." I went back into the building, using my flashlight to navigate through the darkened corridors. The smell of burning electrical equipment was much stronger now, and I could hear crackling sounds coming from the walls where the wiring was overheating. Tech World Electronics was completely dark when I got there. I called out for Peterson, but didn't get an answer. The store felt different in the darkness, bigger somehow, and full of shadows that could hide anything. I made my way toward the back office, using my flashlight to avoid displays and merchandise. The air was getting hazier, which meant smoke was starting to build up even in parts of the building that weren't directly affected by the electrical fire. I found Peterson in the back office, slumped over his desk with his head in his hands. For a moment, I thought he might be unconscious from smoke inhalation, but when I called his name, he looked up. "Sam, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you. We've evacuated the building because of an electrical fire. You need to come with me right now." Peterson stood up, but he was moving slowly, like he was confused or disoriented. "A fire? Where?" "Main electrical room. Half the building's without power and it's spreading. We need to get out of here." "But I haven't finished the inventory. If I don't get these numbers to corporate by tomorrow." "Peterson, forget the inventory. The building is on fire." He looked around the dark office like he was seeing it for the first time. "It is pretty smoky in here, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. And it's going to get worse. Come on." I took Peterson by the arm and guided him out of the office and through the darkened store. He was moving more slowly than I would have liked, and I could tell the smoke was affecting him more than it was affecting me. By the time we got to the main corridor, he was coughing and struggling to catch his breath. "I don't feel very good," he said. "You're going to be fine. Just keep moving." We were about halfway to the main entrance when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the groan of metal under stress. Somewhere in the building, the heat from the electrical fire was causing structural damage. "Peterson, we need to move faster." "I'm trying, but I'm feeling dizzy." He stumbled and almost fell, catching himself against the wall. I realized that he wasn't going to be able to walk out of there under his own power. "Okay," I said. "We're going to do this differently." I put Peterson's arm around my shoulder and half carried, half dragged him toward the exit. He was a smaller man than me, probably only about 160 pounds. But dead weight is dead weight. And at 72 years old, I wasn't as strong as I used to be. But I'd carried heavier loads under worse conditions, and I wasn't about to leave anyone behind. Not in Afghanistan, not in a shopping center, not anywhere. We made it to the main entrance just as the fire department arrived. The paramedics took Peterson from me and immediately started checking him for smoke inhalation, while firefighters rushed past us to deal with the electrical fire. But before I could catch my breath, I heard someone shouting behind me. "What the hell did you think you were doing in there?" It was Peterson's district manager, a sharp-dressed woman named Carol Hendricks, who'd apparently rushed over when she heard about the evacuation. You had no authority to order an evacuation, and you definitely had no business going back into a dangerous building. "Ma'am," I said, still coughing from the smoke. "Your manager was trapped inside." "That's what we have fire departments for. You could have gotten yourself killed. You could have gotten him killed. And now we have liability issues because some security guard decided to play hero." The crowd from the evacuation was still gathered in the parking lot, and they could hear every word. I saw Tim step forward like he wanted to say something, but I shook my head slightly. This wasn't his fight. "Lady, are you serious right now?" It was the construction worker who'd spoken up in Tech World earlier. "This man just saved your manager's life and you're chewing him out." "This is a corporate matter," Hendricks snapped. "I don't need input from customers." "Corporate matter?" The elderly woman from the crowd joined in. "A man risks his life to save someone, and you call it a corporate matter." More voices joined in, and I could see Hendricks realizing she was on the wrong side of public opinion. But her pride wouldn't let her back down. "The point is," she said, raising her voice over the crowd, "that proper procedures weren't followed. There are protocols for a reason." That's when Fire Chief Martinez approached us, having overheard the argument. "Ma'am, I don't know what protocols you're talking about, but this man's quick thinking probably saved your employee's life. Another few minutes in that smoke, and we might have been looking at a very different outcome." Outside in the parking lot, I found Tim waiting with the rest of the evacuees. When he saw me come out with Peterson, he ran over to help. "Is he okay?" "He will be. Just breathed in too much smoke." "Mr. Harris, you went back in there to get him?" "Someone had to." Tim looked at me like I just told him I'd flown to the moon. "You could have been killed." But I wasn't. The fire department got the electrical fire under control within about an hour, and most of the damage was contained to the main power room and a few adjacent storage areas. Nobody was seriously injured, and the building was reopened the next day after the power company installed temporary electrical service. But the story of what had happened, how a 72-year-old security guard had gone back into a burning building to rescue someone who'd been left behind, spread even faster than the video of my confrontation with Derek Paulson. This time, I couldn't avoid the media attention. Local news stations wanted interviews, newspapers wanted to do feature stories, and my phone was ringing constantly with requests for comments. I turned down most of them, but I did agree to do one interview with the local evening news, mainly because they promised to focus on the importance of emergency preparedness rather than on me personally. The interview was supposed to last 5 minutes and ended up going for 20. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, asked good questions about building safety and emergency procedures. But she also wanted to know about my background and what had motivated me to go back into the building for Peterson. "Mr. Harris," she said, "this is the second time in a week that you've been in the news for helping someone who was in trouble. Some people are calling you a hero. How do you respond to that? I respond by saying that those people don't understand what a hero is, I said. A hero is someone who does something extraordinary under extraordinary circumstances. What I did was ordinary. Any decent person would have done the same thing. But not everyone would have gone back into a burning building. It wasn't really burning. It was just electrical equipment overheating. And I've been in much more dangerous situations than that. You're referring to your military service? Yes. Can you tell us about that? I hesitated. I'd never talked publicly about my time in Afghanistan, mainly because most of what I'd experienced there wasn't the kind of thing you discuss on television. But Sarah Mitchell had a way of asking questions that made you want to answer them honestly. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a staff sergeant in the Army, I said. My job was to keep young soldiers alive and help them do their jobs effectively. That meant sometimes putting yourself at risk to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Is that how you see what happened this week? Protecting people who couldn't protect themselves? In a way, yes. Tim Morrison is a good kid who was being treated unfairly by someone who had power over him. Peterson was trapped in a building and needed help getting out. In both cases, I was in a position to help, so I helped. What do you want people to take away from these incidents? I thought about that for a moment. I want people to understand that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other. It doesn't matter if you're a security guard or a CEO or a college student working part-time in an electronics store. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. When you see someone being treated unfairly, you speak up. That's not heroism. That's just being a decent human being. The interview aired that Friday night, and by Saturday morning, my phone was ringing again. This time it wasn't reporters calling. It was someone I never expected to hear from again. Is this Sam Harris? Yes. Mr. Harris, this is Michael Chen. I don't know if you remember me, but I almost dropped the phone. Michael. Of course I remember you. How did you find me? I saw the interview on the news last night. When you mentioned Afghanistan and being a staff sergeant, I thought it might be you. I did some research online and found out you lived here in Ohio. Michael Chen, the scared 19-year-old kid from Iowa who'd run toward a burning truck to help save his fellow soldiers. I hadn't spoken to him since our unit was deployed back to the States in 2009. Michael, how are you? What are you doing now? I'm good, Sergeant. Really good. I'm married, got 2 kids, and I'm working in city government here in Des Moines. City government? I'm the deputy mayor, actually. Been in politics for about 6 years now. I was stunned. The quiet, scared kid I'd known in Afghanistan was now the deputy mayor of Des Moines, Iowa. Michael, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. Well, I learned from the best. You taught me that taking care of people is the most important job anyone can have. We talked for about an hour, catching up on everything that had happened in the 14 years since we'd last seen each other. Michael told me about his wife, his kids, his work in city government. I told him about my construction business, my daughter, my job at the shopping center. Sergeant, he said finally, I called because I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? I watched that interview last night, and I saw how you handled those situations with the kid at the electronics store and the evacuation. You've got exactly the kind of leadership and judgment that we need in city government. Michael, I'm 72 years old. I think my days of starting new careers are behind me. Hear me out. We're starting a new program here in Des Moines, a youth mentorship initiative designed to help at-risk teenagers develop job skills and life skills. We need someone to run it, someone who understands how to work with young people, someone who has the respect of the community. What does that have to do with me? It has everything to do with you. You've spent your whole life helping young people in the army, in your business, even as a security guard. And after seeing how you handled that situation with Tim Morrison, I think you're exactly the kind of person we need. I was quiet for a long time, trying to process what Michael was suggesting. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do what you've always done, but on a bigger scale. Help young people who are struggling. Give them the support and guidance they need to succeed. Show them that someone believes in them. It was an incredible offer, but there were practical considerations. Michael, I live in Ohio. I've got a life here, responsibilities. We'd help you relocate if you wanted to, but actually, I was thinking maybe we could start something similar where you are. Partner with local organizations. Maybe even work with that shopping center where you've been making such a difference. The idea was intriguing, but it was also overwhelming. Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sergeant, I want you to know something. Everything I accomplished, everything I've been able to do with my life, it started with you believing in me when I was 19 years old and scared out of my mind. You saved my life in that truck, but more than that, you saved my future by treating me like I was worth saving. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks. A confrontation with an abusive manager had led to a viral video, which had led to an electrical fire, which had led to a news interview, which had led to a phone call from someone I'd served with in Afghanistan 14 years ago. It was like a chain reaction, where each event had led to the next one in a way that I never could have predicted. And at the center of it all was a simple principle that I'd learned in the Army and had tried to live by ever since. That we all have a responsibility to look out for each other. The next Monday, I went back to work at the shopping center, expecting things to return to normal. Instead, I found Maria waiting for me in the security office with a visitor, a man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and a nervous expression. "Sam," Maria said, "this is Richard Paulson. He's Derek Paulson's father." I shook the man's hand, wondering why Derek's father would want to meet with me. "Mr. Harris," Paulson said, "I came here to apologize for my son's behavior last week. What he did to that young man was inexcusable, and the way he treated you was inexcusable as well. Mr. Paulson, you don't need to apologize for your son's actions. He's a grown man responsible for his own choices." Maybe not, but I feel responsible anyway. Derek was raised better than that. His mother and I taught him to treat people with respect, especially people who work hard for a living. Somewhere along the way, he forgot those lessons. "We all make mistakes," I said. "The important thing is that we learn from them." Paulson nodded. "That's actually why I'm here. Derek has been having a hard time finding work since the incident. Word gets around in retail management, and nobody wants to hire someone who's been in a viral video for abusing employees. I'm sorry to hear that. But he's been doing some thinking, and he wants to make things right. He's asked me to find out if there's any way he could apologize to you and to the young man he treated so badly." I thought about that. Part of me wanted to say that Derek had made his bed and should lie in it. But another part of me remembered what I'd told Tim about there being 2 kinds of people in the world. Those who build others up and those who tear others down. And I wondered which kind I wanted to be. Where is Derek now? He's in the parking lot. He was too embarrassed to come in and ask himself. Bring him in. A few minutes later, Derek Paulson walked into the security office, looking like a completely different person than the arrogant assistant manager I'd confronted the week before. His expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a polo shirt. His hair wasn't perfectly styled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "Mr. Harris," he said, "I owe you an apology. The way I treated you and Tim was wrong. I was so focused on asserting my authority that I forgot about treating people with basic decency. Derek, I appreciate you coming here to say that. I also want you to know that I've learned something from what happened, about leadership, about responsibility, about how you treat people who work for you. What have you learned?" Derek was quiet for a moment, like he was trying to find the right words. "I learned that real authority comes from people's respect, not from their fear. And I learned that when you're in a position of power over someone, your job is to help them succeed, not to tear them down when they make mistakes. Those are important lessons. Mr. Harris, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but would you be willing to come with me to apologize to Tim? I think it might mean more coming from both of us." I looked at Derek carefully, trying to judge whether his remorse was genuine or just an act designed to help him find another job. What I saw was a young man who was genuinely ashamed of his behavior and who seemed to understand that he needed to change. "All right," I said. "Let's go talk to Tim." We found Tim working at Tech World Electronics, training a new employee on the cash register procedures. When he saw Derek and me walking into the store together, his face went white. "Tim," I said, "Derek has something he wants to say to you." Derek stepped forward, and I could see that his hands were shaking slightly. "Tim, I owe you a sincere apology. The way I treated you last week was completely unprofessional and unfair. I accused you of theft without any evidence. I humiliated you in front of customers, and I threatened to have you arrested for something you didn't do." Tim didn't say anything, just stood there listening. "I was wrong," Derek continued, "not just about the money, although I was obviously wrong about that too, but about the way I handled the whole situation. A good manager would have looked for other explanations before jumping to conclusions. A good manager would have protected your dignity instead of attacking it." "Thank you for saying that," Tim said quietly. "I also want you to know that I've learned from this experience. I'm never going to treat another employee the way I treated you. And if I ever get another management position, I'm going to remember what it feels like to be on the receiving end of unfair treatment." Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a letter of recommendation. I know it probably doesn't mean much coming from me, but if you ever need a reference for another job, I want you to know that I think you're a good employee who deserves to be treated with respect." Tim took the envelope, looking surprised. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting this. You shouldn't have needed it. You should have been treated fairly from the beginning." We talked for a few more minutes, and I was impressed by how Derek handled the conversation. He didn't try to make excuses for his behavior or minimize the impact it had had on Tim. He just took responsibility for his mistakes and tried to make amends as best he could. As we were leaving the store, Derek turned to me. "Mr. Harris, thank you for agreeing to come with me. I know Tim probably wouldn't have listened to me if you hadn't been there." "Derek, can I give you some advice? Please. Leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or the toughest person in the room. It's about being the person who cares most about helping other people succeed. If you remember that, you'll be fine." Derek nodded. I'll remember. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Michael Chen with an update on the youth mentorship program we'd discussed. Sergeant, I've been talking to my colleagues here in city government, and we're all excited about the possibility of starting something like this in your area. We think it could be a model for other communities. What would it look like? We'd start small, maybe work with local high schools to identify students who could benefit from mentorship and job training. Partner with local businesses to provide internship opportunities. Create a support network for young people who are struggling academically or financially. It sounded like exactly the kind of program that could have made a difference for someone like Tim Morrison or for the younger Derek Paulson before he'd lost his way. What would you need from me? Your experience, your leadership, your ability to connect with young people. You'd essentially be the program director, responsible for recruiting mentors, working with students, and coordinating with local organizations. And this would be based here in Ohio? That's the plan. We think starting in a smaller community might actually be more effective than trying to launch in a big city where there are already a lot of competing programs. I thought about everything that had happened over the past month, the confrontation with Derek, the evacuation of the shopping center, the media attention, the reconciliation between Derek and Tim. All of it had started because I couldn't stand to watch a young person being treated unfairly. Michael, I think I'm interested. Really? Really. But I have some conditions. Name them. First, I want Tim Morrison involved. He's a good kid with good instincts, and I think he could be a valuable part of the program. Done. Second, I want to make sure we're not just helping kids who are already on the right track. I want to focus on the ones who are struggling, the ones who need someone to believe in them. That's exactly what we had in mind. And third, I want to make sure that anyone who participates in this program, mentors, students, business partners, understands that it's about building people up, not tearing them down. Sergeant, that's the only kind of program worth having. 6 months later, the Veteran Youth Mentorship Program held its grand opening at the Grandview Community Center, just down the street from the shopping center where everything had started. Tim Morrison was our first program coordinator, having left his job at Tech World Electronics to help get the program off the ground. Derek Paulson was one of our mentors, working with a 16-year-old kid who reminded me a lot of Derek at that age. The opening ceremony was small but meaningful. When it came time for me to give my speech, I looked out at the crowd and saw faces that represented everything I'd learned about second chances. 6 months ago, I said, I was just an old security guard trying to do his job and stay out of trouble. I never imagined that standing up for one 19-year-old kid would lead to all of this. 2 years later, I got to watch Maria Santos, a 17-year-old girl who'd been failing out of high school when she joined our program, give the valedictorian speech at her graduation. She'd gone from barely passing to getting a full scholarship to Ohio State, and in her speech, she thanked the program for teaching her that someone believing in you can change everything. Last month, I watched Derek present a citizenship award to Kevin Williams, a kid who'd been arrested twice for shoplifting before joining our program. Kevin had just finished his first year of community college and was working part-time at a local auto shop, saving money to buy his first car. When Derek handed him the award, both of them had tears in their eyes. As for me, I'm 75 years old now, and every day I get to see young people discover what they're capable of when someone believes in them. It's the best job I've ever had, and it all started because I couldn't stand to watch a 19-year-old kid get humiliated over $63 that turned out to be stuck in a cash register drawer. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. Sometimes standing up for one person ends up helping hundreds of people. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to walk away when someone needs help. That's the America I fought for in Afghanistan. That's the community I want to live in. And that's the legacy I hope to leave behind when my time here is done.